has crept, I notice, into our literature and journalism, a new way of flattering the wealthy and the great. In more straightforward times, flattery itself was more straightforward. Falsehood itself was more true. A poor man wishing to please a rich man simply said that he was the wisest, bravest, tallest, strongest, most benevolent, and most beautiful of mankind. And as even the rich man probably knew that he wasn't that, the thing did the less harm. When courtiers sang the praises of a king, they attributed to him things that were entirely improbable, as that he resembled the sun at noonday, that they had to shade their eyes when he entered the room, that his people could not breathe without him, or that he had, with his single sword, conquered Europe, Asia, Africa, and America. The safety of this method was its artificiality. Between the king and his public image, there was really no relation. But the moderns have invented a much subtler and more poisonous kind of eulogy. The modern method is to take the prince or rich man to give a credible picture of his type of personality, as that he is businesslike, or a sportsman, or fond of art, or convivial, or reserved, and then enormously exaggerate the value and importance of these natural qualities.
We live in this bizarre world of a culture where we pedestalize celebrities, oftentimes for their talents, but sometimes they don't even have a talent to speak of. They're just famous for being famous. And no other time has this been on full display than it has been in the summer of 2023, when two major artists had a coast-to-coast United States tour that brought their fans out like disciples to worship at their altars in the temples of the stadiums which held their concerts. Who are those two artists? No other than Taylor Swift and Beyonce. In fact, it's so crazy that their fans have names, Swifties and the Beehive. And for someone who actually at one point considered herself a part of the Beehive, basically I was a fanatical fan of Beyonce and her music, my mindset in that time was that this woman could do no wrong, and everything that she touched was gold, and every song that she dropped was amazing. And I even looked at her as this incredibly inspiring, virtuous human being. Thank the Lord that the veil has been lifted off my eyes, because I see her as the fallible woman that she is, just like me, just like many of you in my audience, male or female. We're all fallible. But it was just interesting to see how much hysteria was caused just to be able to get tickets to see these two women perform. And don't get me wrong, there were some good elements that came out of this. Seeing a community of people online share their outfits and what they're wearing, and celebrating being able to see their favorite artists, there was a sense of just support that was nice. However, all of this stuff was done in a way to idolize a human being in our culture to godlike status. And that's a very dangerous thing. And we talked about on this channel how important it is to use your talents to inspire people, particularly inspiring people through the Spirit and through God. And I also find it interesting that one person who took this and ran with that is no other than G.K. Chesterton. And Chesterton actually wrote about this many years ago, about 100 years ago, about how he started to notice in his time a shift and change in how the media and journalists would present celebrities. How it went from just admiring or reporting on the good that they do based off of who they are as just normal everyday people, to this sudden exaggeration of everything that they do, everything that they say, everything that they touch, everything that they think, as being so much more elevated than the common man. And it was at that point that this rise in the culture and the cult of the celebrity started to really give birth.
Those who praise Mr. Carnegie do not say that he is as wise as Solomon and as brave as Mars. I wish they did. It would be the next most honest thing to giving their real reason for praising him, which is simply that he has money. The journalists who write about Mr. Pierpont Morgan do not say that he is as beautiful as Apollo. I wish they did. What they do is to take the rich man's superficial life and manner, clothes, hobbies, love of cats, dislike of doctors or whatnot, and then with the assistance of this realism, make the man out to be a prophet and a savior of his kind, whereas he is merely a private and stupid man who happens to like cats or to dislike doctors. The old flatterer took for granted that the king was an ordinary man and set to work to make him out extraordinary. The newer and cleverer flatterer takes for granted that he is extraordinary and that therefore even ordinary things about him will be of interest. I have noticed one very amusing way in which this is done. I noticed the method applied to about 6 of the wealthiest men in England in a book of interviews published by an able and well-known journalist. The flatterer contrives to combine strict truth of fact with a vast atmosphere of awe and mystery by the simple operation of dealing almost entirely in negatives. Suppose you are writing a sympathetic study of Mr. Pierpont Morgan. Perhaps there is not much to say about what he does think or like or admire, but you can suggest whole vistas of his taste and philosophy by talking a great deal about what he does not think or like or admire. You say of him, but little attracted to the most recent schools of German philosophy, he stands almost as resolutely aloof from the tendencies of transcendental pantheism as from the narrower ecstasies of neo-Catholicism. Or suppose I am called upon to praise the charwoman who has just come into my house and who certainly deserves it much more. I say it would be a mistake to class Mrs. Higgs among the followers of Loisy. Her position is in many ways different, nor is she wholly to be identified with the concrete Hebraism of Harnack. It is a splendid method, as it gives the flatterer an opportunity of talking about something else besides the subject of the flattery, and it gives the subject of the flattery a rich, if somewhat bewildered, mental glow, as of one who has somehow gone through agonies of philosophical choice of which he was previously unaware. It is a splendid method, but I wish it were applied sometimes to charwomen rather than only to millionaires.
We see this today in our culture. Everything that a celebrity does is golden. Everything that they do is so much better than the common person, so much better than you or I. We've gotten to a point in society where we take these celebrities and we uplift them and we pedestalize them for being wealthy, for living normal everyday lives like everybody else times 10, for their talent, for their looks, for superficiality. I mean, think of the Kardashian clan for a moment. What good have they really done with their gifts and what God has given them or bestowed upon them? In many respects, they've done nothing but enrich themselves, often at the expense of themselves. They've changed the way that society has seen women's bodies. Kim Kardashian alone has been such a juggernaut on society that she has the power to actually change how society sees women's bodies. Celebrities nowadays have so much power. We rely on them to give their opinions on everything from politics to religion, to environmental issues, to social issues. And we hold on to their words as though it is gospel. And that is such a dangerous thing. Who are today's Pierpont Morgans? It's not just celebrities, but we also have it happening in the political realm. No matter what side of the aisle that you sit on, we pedestalize our politicians and look at them as though they do no wrong. That even when they fall, that we are afraid to criticize them, hold them to the fire. It's like our minds have been taken over into this like sheeple mindset, this cult-like mindset where people are afraid to actually criticize those that they pedestalize. And it's crazy to think how G.K. Chesterton, almost 100 years ago, was able to see this change happening in his time, and he tried to warn us about it in his writings. But we didn't heed those warnings, and here we are today.
There is another way of flattering important people which has become very common, I notice, among writers in the newspapers and elsewhere. It consists in applying to them the phrases simple or quiet or modest, without any sort of meaning or relation to the person to whom they are applied. To be simple is the best thing in the world. To be modest is the next best thing. I'm not so sure about being quiet. I'm rather inclined to think that really modest people make a great deal of noise. It is quite self-evident that really simple people make a great deal of noise. but simplicity and modesty, at least, are very rare and royal human virtues, not to be lightly talked about. Few human beings, and at rare intervals, have really risen into being modest. Not one man in 10 or in 20 has by long wars become simple, as an actual old soldier does by long wars become simple. These virtues are not things to fling about as mere flattery. Many prophets and righteous men have desired to see these things and have not seen them. But in the description of the births, lives, and deaths of very luxurious men, they are used incessantly and quite without thought.
This part of Chesterton's essay reminds me of Matthew chapter 6, verses 24 to 27. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and the world. It's crazy because so many people have criticism for Catholics, saying that we worship idols, thinking that a statue in our churches or in our homes are these graven images and idols that we bow to the foot of. And nothing could be further from the truth. You and I both know that. But it's crazy how the world in general has so many idols, and idols are far beyond statues and trinkets. Anything can become an idol, even good things. I'm in the fitness world, and I admit that fitness and the body and health can become a graven idol. People don't think about things like that. Obsessions with money, wealth, success, relationships, material objects and goods, lifestyles. All of these things can lead directly to the deadly sins of envy and avarice as we long to have things that other people have that are not our own. It's a dangerous, slippery slope. This is where true modesty actually comes into play. Learning how to humble yourself and to be able to let go of everything in order to follow Jesus Christ.
If a journalist has to describe a great politician or financier, the things are substantially the same. Entering a room or walking down a thoroughfare, he always says, Mr. Midas was quietly dressed in a black frock coat, a white waistcoat, and light grey trousers with a plain green tie and simple flower in his buttonhole. As if anyone would expect him to have a crimson frock coat or spangled trousers. As if anyone would expect him to have a burning Catherine wheel in his buttonhole. But this process, which is absurd enough when applied to the ordinary and external lives of worldly people, becomes perfectly intolerable when it is applied, as it always is applied, to the one episode which is serious even in the lives of politicians. I mean their death. When we have been sufficiently bored with the account of the simple costume of the millionaire, which is generally about as complicated as any that he could assume without being simply thought mad. When we have been told about the modest home of the millionaire, a home which is generally much too immodest to be called a home at all. When we have followed him through all these unmeaning eulogies, we are always asked last of all to admire his quiet funeral. I do not know what else people think a funeral should be except quiet. Yet again and again, over the grave of every one of those sad rich men for whom one should surely feel, first and last, a speechless pity, over the grave of Bate, over the grave of Whiteley, this sickening nonsense about modesty and simplicity has been poured out.
But all of this reminds me of something that Jesus Christ said in Matthew chapter 19, verse 21, and here's how it goes. Jesus said, "If you wish to be complete, go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me." But when the young man heard this statement, he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property. And there is the crux of all of this. This celebrity culture that we're in, this idolization of everything and everyone around us. Those crutches are the hardest things to let go of. How many things are you carrying? How many people do you pedestalize who are leading you down the wrong path, not the righteous path, that are holding you back from living in your true faith and life through Christ? The idols that we hold in our culture, the celebrity worship, is destroying so many souls. When you look around, you can see these exact things happening in our culture today: materialism, moral decay, and a lack of spiritual focus. And it's having such a huge impact on us all. When we think about modesty, we often think about modesty simply in dressing, particularly how women dress. But modesty is so much greater than that. True modesty is a way of life. True modesty is a way of living. True modesty is a way of thinking. Humility is at the base of that. How can you humble yourself, lower yourself every single day to let go of your vices, to be able to live fully in the Lord's way? Chesterton was so onto something with this.
I well remember that when Bate was buried, the papers said that the mourning coaches contained everybody of importance, that the floral tributes were sumptuous, splendid, intoxicating. But for all that, it was a simple and quiet funeral. What in the name of Acheron did they expect it to be? Did they think there would be human sacrifice, the immolation of Oriental slaves upon the tomb? Did they think that long rows of Oriental dancing girls would sway hither and thither in an ecstasy of lament? Did they look for the funeral games of Patroclus? I fear they had no such splendid and pagan meaning. I fear they were only using the words quiet and modest as words to fill up a page, a mere piece of the automatic hypocrisy which does become too common among those who have to write rapidly and often. The word modest will soon become like the word honorable, which is said to be employed by the Japanese before any word that occurs in a polite sentence, as put honorable umbrella in honorable umbrella stand, or condescend to clean honorable boots. We shall read in the future that the modest king went out in his modest crown, clad from head to foot in modest gold, and attended with his 10,000 modest earls, their swords modestly drawn. No. If we have to pay for splendor, let us praise it as splendor, not as simplicity. When next I meet a rich man, I intend to walk up to him in the street and address him with Oriental hyperbole. He will probably run away.
That last part of Chesterton's words reminds me so much of 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 5 to 7. You younger men, likewise, be subject to your elders. And all of you, clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, for God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. But even more, I want to continue on to what it says in verse 8. Be of sober spirit and be on alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. So powerful. The antidote to a lot of this is to learn how to humble yourself and to turn your heart over to God, your worship, everything over to him. Take it out of your idols, take it out of the celebrities, take it out of the politicians, take it out of the things that you're trying to place so much of an emphasis on above him. And it's so easy to slip into that darkness and not even realize. Here's the question I have for you. What are those things that you place such a great emphasis on? Where have you fallen when it comes to idolization? Go ahead and post that below in the comments and let's discuss exactly what that looks like in your life. Perhaps you sharing that can help somebody else out in getting closer to God and releasing the things that do not serve them. Boy, do I love G.K. Chesterton, and I don't think he gets as much play as he deserves. And I think that it's so important for those of us who are on a faith journey to go deeper, need to learn about our powerful writers, our Catholic writers, because all of this is a part of your spiritual enrichment. Make sure that you go ahead and you subscribe right now to the channel and smash that like button. Speaking of all of this celebrity culture, idolization, if we can be honest, ego, I talked about in a video about how important it is to find your identity through Christ. Jesus Christ tells us very clearly to find ourselves through him. And if you don't know what that means, honey, I did a video on it that you definitely need to check out. Let's go ahead and get into that and what that looks like in this next video right over here. I'll see you over there.